Hello, and welcome to the U.S. History Underground. I'm Mr. O'Hagan, and as always, I'm joined by my partner in historic conversation, Mr.
I
Zagari.
like that. Partner in historic
How
conversation.
are you doing today, Zach?
We're back at school. We're in the 20th century as it pertains to our content. All is well.
Yeah, well, you and I had spoken, and over February break, we thought we'd be doing some recording in the Chevrolet studios.
Yes.
That's an inside joke we won't go into now. But as always with recording, we need to be a little ingenuitive and be adaptable. And that's really always been a hallmark trait of the American and national identity. And today we want to shine a spotlight on that historical theme and many others as we address one of the most monumental events in U.S. history.
That's right, Mr. O'Hagan. Today on the podcast, World War II.
Well, it's pretty ambitious to do a World War II podcast, Zags. How do you even begin to scratch the surface of such an enormous topic? An event that even today continues to shape many of the relationships and situations in the U.S. and around the world.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. O'Hagan. It would be impossible to do justice to the Second World War in one podcast or 1,000 podcasts. But we can offer a starting point at least and an overview. And as we draw closer to May and June and our AP and Regents exams, it makes sense to start thinking in terms of larger themes. So today, we are going to use College Board's 8 historical themes and apply them to World War II. We are going to post a document in the notes that outline these documents as well, so you have that reference table to guide you through.
Right, Zags, and our AP students, they see these themes every unit when we include them in our class package.
Yes, they do, Mr. O'Hagan. And for our Regent students, this is just another way to understand an event or topic by viewing it through different perspectives or themes. So, Mr. O'Hagan, why don't you start us off with our first theme today?
Sure, Zags. Well, I mentioned American and national identity. This theme focuses on how and why American and national identity and values have developed. In other words, how we see ourselves as a nation and as a people. World War II shifts us from a more insular and continental power to a world superpower. Prior to the Second World War, Americans had dipped their foot in the pool of international relations during the First World War, but almost immediately retreated to our long-standing policy of neutrality. So clearly, World War II was a game changer in terms of our foreign policy. Where previously we thought neutrality was in our best interest, now this globalism or internationalism serves America best. It's also fair to say that we see ourselves as an indispensable nation after the Second World War. Our industrial might saves the Allies, Great Britain and France are fading powers, and the new threat of Soviet totalitarianism needs to be met. And the perspective of the American government and the American people, for that matter, is that we alone need to rise to that challenge. It's a really dramatic shift. Zags, what's the next theme through which we can interpret World War II?
Well, today we're going to take a look at Theme 2, Work Exchange and Technology. This theme examines the elements that contribute to the establishment of economic exchange systems with a particular emphasis on the influence of technology, economic markets, and government. Even during the challenging times of the Great Depression in the 1930s, America was already a significant industrial force. However, World War II revealed the full potential of the American economy. Winston Churchill acknowledged this potential when he stated, "The United States is like a giant boiler. Once the fire is lit under it, there is no limit to the power it can generate." Our capacity to produce aircraft, battleships, food products, and various industrial goods transformed our economic interactions with the global community. That boiler was ignited during the war and has been continuously fueled ever since. This is closely linked to the sense of being essential, as mentioned by Mr. O'Hagan in the previous theme. Furthermore, consider the creation of the atomic bomb as a notable example of technological advancement. Is there any more of a striking illustration of how World War II stimulated developments that would ever change the world?
That's a great example, Zags. I mean, it's something that had a singular impact on the next 50 years of world history. And obviously, nuclear technology is still important in the 21st century, especially with the threat it still poses if it were to fall into the hands of unreliable nation states or actors. Well, let's look at theme 3, geography and the environment. This theme focuses on the role of geography and both the natural and human-made environments in the social and political developments of the United States. During World War II, America's geography, at least the continental United States, made it much more secure than many other nations. Obviously, places like Hawaii, with Pearl Harbor, and even the Aleutian Islands in Alaska saw military action. And though fears continued throughout the war in mainland America, we were relatively safe. One environmental concern that probably bears mentioning is the radioactive fallout from the nuclear testing. It would be years before the public was made fully aware of these dangers. And of course, as the development of this technology continued in the years after the Second World War, an entire no nukes activism arose. Zags, what's the next theme we should highlight?
Well, let's look at theme 4, Mr. O, migration and settlement. This theme focuses on why and how various people move to and within the United States. Perhaps the most notable migration within the nation at this time was actually forced migration. A significant aspect of migration during this period was forced relocation. Specifically, this refers to the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Individuals of Japanese descent on the West Coast were often labeled as the fifth column, perceived as a covert threat supporting the Japanese Empire. Tragically, out of the 122,000 individuals interned due to FDR's Executive Order 9066, over half of them were American citizens. Japanese Americans sought to demonstrate their loyalty to the United States. One way to counter the negative stereotype of the fifth column was to engage in American pastimes. In a 2024 interview with NPR, Daniel Kwong, who was part of the restoring of the Manzanar camp in California, remarked, "The reason people were placed in this camp, there was a period when individuals of Japanese descent faced hatred, fear, and distrust. Nonetheless, they continued to participate in the American game," meaning baseball. Additionally, Mike Furtanani shared, "Many people believed that baseball was crucial for the community's morale during their time in the camps. It served as a reminder that they were still Americans. Although the situation was dire, playing baseball provided a temporary escape from the harsh realities they faced. For those in the camps, baseball became a means of distraction, allowing them to momentarily forget the troubling circumstances. This experience parallels Mike Piazza's home run that helped the Mets win in the first MLB game following the September 11th attacks, as well as the Yankees reaching the World Series that same year. Baseball served as a bridge to a more comforting and familiar reality for many."
So true in regards to baseball. We'll talk about that as well when we look at Jackie Robinson.
Sure.
You know, baseball is this kind of national spotlight where conversations about all kinds of things can happen, but baseball is kind of where that conversation happens. It's almost like the American kitchen table.
In addition, it wasn't just Japanese Americans who were interned. Approximately 10,000 Italian Americans and 10,000 German Americans were also forcibly relocated during the war.
You know, a very sad chapter in our history, and later evidence would bring this even to sharper focus, as there were never any serious charges of sabotage or treason ever brought against any of those 122,000 Japanese victims.
No, nor was there any significant evidence related to Italian or German sabotage that legally justified their relocation either. We should also highlight the very heated historical debate over Jewish migration and settlement, or the limits on that activity during FDR's administration. Dr. Raphael Madoff writes that the United States immigration system severely limited the number of German Jews admitted during the Nazi years to about 26,000 annually. But even that quota was less than 25% filled during most of Hitler's era. Roosevelt's defenders argue that the plight of the Jews was issues faced by Roosevelt, and that limited immigration for many groups was more of a sign of wartime national security concerns. Like everything else in this podcast, this topic deserves more in-depth discussion, but it's a vital component in any discussion of migration and settlement. So, what do we have for theme 5, Mr. O?
Well, theme 5 is politics and power, and this theme focuses on how different social and political groups have influenced society and government in the United States, as well as how political beliefs and institutions have changed over time. I've always taught my students that Franklin Roosevelt is the game changer, the transformative president. He changes the domestic role of the presidency during the New Deal, And Congress willingly allows that to happen. Basically, they hand over the right to make the legislative agenda to the executive branch. But this is an existential change. The role of the presidency changes because the role of the United States in the world changes. In other words, FDR makes the New Deal, but World War II makes FDR and all the presidents who follow him the leader of the free world. And this, of course, also changes America's international standing. But that's our next theme, isn't it, Zags?
For sure. And that's going to be America in the world. And this theme focuses on the interactions between nations of the world and the United States and the influences of the United States on world affairs. Until World War II, our interactions with other nations significantly influenced us. However, following the war, the narrative shifted to focus on our impact on the globe. The period after World War II is often referred to as the Cold War, characterized by the dominance of superpowers. While the Soviet Union was undoubtedly a military competitor to the United States, in reality, America stood largely alone. Behind the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union resembled a struggling, bureaucratic, and ineffective superpower. Ironically, this aligns with what the Chinese chairman would later describe as a paper tiger. Intimidating in appearance, but easily dealt with when sufficient pressure was applied.
Kind of interesting. That's what Chairman Mao used to describe the Americans and the Western powers, but it was a pretty apt description of what the Soviets were.
Few moments in American history exemplify a turning point as clearly as World War II. Before the war, America functioned as just another nation striving for growth and progress. But afterward, it emerged as the leading superpower, a status it has maintained despite numerous challenges, even into the 21st century. And this really defines the legacy of World War II. I mean, what should we discuss next, Mr. O'Hagan?
Well, I think we have to look at American and regional culture and how that's going to be impacted by the Second World War. So this theme focuses on how and why national, regional, and group cultures developed and changed, as well as how culture has shaped government policy and economy. I think we can look at many developments that are a byproduct of World War II, Zags. For example, the migration of people to the Sun Belt and the growth of the West Coast, the Sun Belt being the southern part of the United States where it's just warmer. And that's very specific to the culture of the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants.
We're crushing it with baseball analogies today and symbolism.
But as we know, that's so much a part of the American culture at the time. It's actually American and regional culture to talk about baseball. How can we forget the growth of the suburbs?
Sure.
And how the romanticized vision of the American dream is accompanied by the white picket fence around a Levitt house with a Chevy in the driveway.
Here we go with the Chevy again, too.
Now, that really is more indicative of what we're going to see immediately after the war and the 1950s, but it gets its footing right here at the Second World War. And the Second World War forces us to look at other cultures and question them. It's no coincidence that the Jim Crow South faces its harshest scrutiny in the years immediately following World War II. How could a nation that had dedicated itself to defeating the evil of Nazi Germany and Hitler's creed of racial superiority continue blindly on as many of those beliefs were carried out on a daily basis in the American South? World War II affects all of those regions. Well, we've been at this a little while, but I know we're coming to an end. So what's our last theme, Zags?
Well, that we're going to hit upon here is theme 8, and that is social structures. And social structures, this theme focuses on how and why systems of social organization develop and change, as well as the impact that these systems have on the broader society. There's a lot of directions we could go here, but I'm going to focus on the GI Bill. Americans love to celebrate the social mobility that exists in our society, but the truth is a little harder to embrace. Our social structures have remained relatively consistent, and it's not very easy to move from one social class to the next. However, the GI Bill, which granted free education and relatively friendly housing loans to returning World War II vets, sent hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of men to college who, in previous generations, would have been considered working class. This opportunity changed their economic future and established a professional middle class in post-World War II America. Practically nothing had a more significant impact on American society in the second half of the 20th century than the GI Bill.
Zags, I feel like we still have so much that we left out of the discussion, but that was kind of the point, wasn't it?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, what we hope to accomplish was to look at something as dramatic as World War II through the lens of all of these different themes. This is a great way to approach any topic in American history, and in comparing themes from one time period to the next, learning to identify the continuities and changes from one era to the next. Another great way to get prepared for either the AP exam or the Regents exam.
Exactly, Mr. O'Hagan. And hopefully, these thematic discussions will encourage our listeners to do some more specific research on any one of the individual themes we discussed here today. Well, thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to check out all the great videos, content spotlights, A Push on the Road segments, and podcasts on this YouTube channel. We'll catch you next time here on the U.S. History Underground.
Underground Army dismissed.